If you're a religious fanatic, maybe this isn't a video for you. Today I'm going to tell you a bit about the grim life of Father Marcial Maciel de Goyado. I'll try to be as respectful as possible, and this time I won't make my classic dumb comments that I usually throw out so as not to offend anyone. Here's the intro, and then you decide whether to stay or not. Presented as the Apostle of Youth by John Paul II, his protector, and blessed by Pius XIV, Marcial Maciel de Goyado was the leader and founder of the congregation Legionaries of Christ, founded in January 1941. At first, it was believed that he would be a saint, until the Catholic Church itself had no choice but to accept that he was the biggest predator in its recent history. This is the case of Marcial Maciel de Goyado. Over the years, Maciel abused 60 minors, both men and women, and his habits spread as an example within the organization. And this is not me saying it. It is said by the very congregation that he himself created. The Legionaries of Christ in October 2019 acknowledged that in addition to these aberrant events between 41 and that year, meaning 2019, there were a total of 175 boys and 16-year-old victims of 33 priests of the congregation, and that's not all. Another 90 students from the schools and seminaries dependent on this same congregation were victims of 54 seminarians, of which 46 never became priests, let's say luckily. Although this bomb exploded overnight, the complaints did not come in that way. The Vatican knew what Maciel and his companions were doing. They knew from the beginning, but decided to keep it quiet, until it became unsustainable and the bomb exploded in their hands. This during the papacy of Benedict XV. Some say that this was not only a desperate attempt by the Legionaries of Christ and the Vatican itself to save the congregation, and by this I mean the report that these groups made together accepting what happened, but also to hide $295 million in paradises that were discovered when the Pandora Papers were revealed. But I'll tell you a little more about this later. For decades, Maciel and his organization were seen as a role model from the highest levels of the Vatican. But these revelations, and I mean the abuses, brought to public knowledge the complex web of complicity that kept them safe for decades. First, allow me to introduce Maciel. Marcial Maciel de Goyado. He was born in Cotaja, Mexico, which is in Michoacan, on March 10, 1920. From the beginning, his life was headed towards the church. His family was deeply involved in it. His great-uncles Rafael Guisar y Valencia, now a saint, Bishop of Veracruz, and Antonio Guisar y Valencia, Bishop of Chihuahua, were joined by his uncles Segundo Duis Guisar Barragan, Bishop of Campeche and Saltillo, and Jesus de Golado Guisar, who held the position of Cristero General. At the age of 15, Maciel, this in the year 1936, moved to Mexico City to begin his priestly education in a seminary that was run by his great-uncle Rafael Guisar y Valencia. While he was in this place, the Legionaries of Christ were founded in the year 41 on January 3rd initially. This congregation was named the Missals, Missionaries of the Sacred Heart and the Virgin of Sorrows, to later become a Legionary of Christ. Already in the year 44 on November 26, he obtained the priestly order in the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe, Mexico, to then move 2 years later to Spain along with a group of young Mexicans to study humanities at the Pontifical University of Comillas. From there, he was expelled for reasons never revealed, but it cannot be said that he was not. Perhaps we can imagine why, but well, this is not certain to me. However, this was not of much importance. His family, as I told you before, weighed in the church, and Maciel was opened the doors of the Vatican, being received in 1946 by Pope Pius XII. who was already aware of the project of the Legionaries of Christ, including the creation of schools and seminaries. Maciel received the blessing along with his congressman. Thanks to this, in the year 1950, he created the Higher Studies Center of the Legion of Christ in Rome. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the Legionaries were growing by leaps and bounds. You know that everything requires money. And here is where you ask, or we ask ourselves, where he obtained resources. Well, Maciel obtained them from his relationships with the Mexican high society, but don't think that he used all this money for this congregation. Secret of praise. In other words, this means that he could expand wherever he wanted. Obviously, by that time, the Vatican, and this is not me saying it, the 2019 investigation would prove it, already knew about several reports of abuses perpetrated by this individual and other members of the congregation. On the other hand, speaking of the illegal handling of money, well, let's say the complaints were not necessary. As I had already told you, part of the funds raised by the Legionaries ended up in Rome. Now let's move on with this to the relationship of Maciel with Pope John Paul II, a character quite loved in this country, in Mexico, and who unfortunately was a key piece. The arrival of the Pole Karol Wojtyla, that is, Pope John Paul II, to lead the church, was a new advancement for Maciel and his Legionaries of Christ. The new pope put him under, it can be said, his protection. He kept him near during his trips to Mexico, in 1979, in 90 and 93, and he entrusted him with missions in Europe and Latin America. In addition, he appointed him as a permanent consultant to the Congregation for the Clergy in 94, and a member of the Special Assembly for America of the Synod of Bishops in 1997. To give you an idea of the support he had when Maciel celebrated his 50 years as a priest, this in the year 90, the Pope sent him a congratulatory letter for his pastoral work. And 3 years earlier, in 91, when the congregation also turned 50, the Pontiff himself ordained 60 new priests from the congregation at St. Peter's Basilica. John Paul described Maciel as an effective guide for youth, despite the fact that dozens of abuse allegations were already known. The Vatican received 240 documents that evidenced that the situation was known much earlier. Our complaint is from the year 1988, and while Ratzinger, who would later become Pope Benedict XVI, was a cardinal, they were passing this terrible hot potato to each other without taking any action. I think the Legion, as we understood it, should be eliminated. These were the words of Felix Alarcón, who was a victim of Maciel while he was a seminarian and a member of the Legionaries of Christ. On the other hand, the newspaper El País reported in 2006 that the founder of the Legionaries of Christ had been investigated between October 1956 and February 59, ordered by Cardinal Alfredo Ottaviani. Already in 1997, 8 former members of the Legionaries, through a letter addressed to John Paul II, expressed their dissatisfaction and demanded justice for having been victims of Maciel, saying that no one had done anything, neither the congregation nor other members of the Catholic hierarchy. I entered very, very young and was very naive. To abuse us, he didn't explain the privilege it was for us to be with him and serve him, even with sex. He lied to the children and told them that the Holy See had given him permission to take advantage of members of the order. These are the words that can be found in the book Black Bird, written by Elena Sada, where she tells how after 20 years she was able to leave the false branch. Also in the year 99, Alejandro Espinosa, also a victim of Maciel, said, "You don't prosecute a friend of the Pope," they said when we reported them. In the Vatican, they were waiting for God to get them out of the mess with the death of John Paul II, or Maciel. Here comes my part. In a way, it was like that. John Paul II's death has escalated the allegations into a violence case. The complaints of those affected were impossible to cover up, to which were also joined women with whom the priest Maciel had had children. In the year 2004, Maciel had to finally leave the congregation he had founded, and 2 years later, with Ratzinger as Pope, he was ordered to retire from public priesthood to lead a life of prayer and penance. Finally, Marcial Maciel de Goyado died naturally on January 30, 2008, but he left behind the same abusive practices in the Legionaries of Christ. Unfortunately, the abuses did not die with him. In 2019, the report carried out by the Legionaries of Christ themselves in an attempt to end this wave of abuses detailed those committed by their priests and seminarians. Apart from Maciel and his 60 victims, another 11 priests took advantage of between 2 and 5 victims. 5 committed abuses to between 6 and 10 children. In addition, a single priest abused 13 children. 9 took advantage on different occasions of a single victim. 4 committed the same action on a single occasion, and 2 performed this same action online. In schools of the Legion of Christ, 33 children and not so young were victims of 7 priests who, the report assures, should have left public priestly life. Another 3 victims experienced the same fate, but in parishes of the congregation, by 3 priests, while in the youth pastoral group, there was only 1 victim. Of all the perpetrators, to this day, unfortunately, only 1 has been convicted. And what the report says is that the others have not been prosecuted for various reasons, such as the legal situation in various countries, or the statute of limitations. In more recent times, the congregation is again targeted, according to the Pandora Papers. They allegedly conducted financial maneuvers to conceal funds. It is said that they have investment funds called Alpha Omega Trust and Salus Trust, based in New Zealand, worth $295 million. Despite their murky history, this has not been an obstacle for the congregation to grow around the world. With 1,300 lay members, 526 consecrated, 63 lay consecrated, 1,537 legionaries of Christ, 11,584 teenage members in an organization called the SYD, who make a covenant with Christ among themselves to build a new world according to the gospel. In their educational work, 154 schools, 5 international academies, 14 universities, 4 civil universities, and 4 ecclesiastical, 176,000 students are formed, which, on the other hand, can be read on their website. Our motto, "Thy Kingdom Come," expresses the desire for Christ to reign in the hearts of men, families, and society. To this end, we collaborate with other members of the Church and with people of goodwill to make this kingdom a reality. In short, we want to do everything for the kingdom of Christ to the glory of God. I will simply reserve my comments at this point. So I just want to add that there are bad people everywhere, and obviously religion or the church is no exception. But well, it depends on each person. If they believe in God, if they believe in a higher being, if they believe in the church, if they believe in religion, if they believe in whatever. Ultimately, everyone believes in God at some life point. At any moment in our life, we need faith. Faith in something. Remember that the t-shirts, well, the sweatshirt like this one, you can find them at peppamysterio.com. And also a banner will appear here where you can see other models. There are shirts, there are sweatshirts, and they are international shipments. And if you have any suggestions for topics, because I'm running out, you can send me an email to correo@peppamysterio.com.mx, and see you in the next mystery. Goodbye.